What's good? It's your man Ribsy, and welcome to my dark room, aka my kitchen, my bathroom, you name it. As you already know, I don't have the fortune of having an amazing kind of self-contained darkroom, but I still make it happen. So I'm going to show you exactly how I make prints at home with some key tools and not too much hassle. This 4-part series is sponsored by Tetnal. Tetnal is a manufacturer of chemicals used for darkroom by professional labs, but also by home enthusiasts just like me. Their product line includes developing chemistry for black and white and color, darkroom chemistry, and even paper. Not to mention, Tetnal also sells and distributes products from all of your favorite analog photography companies such as Kodak, Fuji, Ilford, and more. Use my affiliate link down below in order to shop for the darkroom chemistry you need to get started, but also for any other film photography things you might be interested in. So you've been making prints up to this point and you've probably come across a couple issues that you might not know how to fix. I'm going to walk you through what I think are some key troubleshooting aspects that might help you with a few examples as well. So first and foremost, to start, I think there's some obvious things we can look at. There's two things that you might see that might be immediately problematic, and that is that your print is way too bright or way too dark. And that's actually very simple to do. So we'll actually look at this right here, which is one of my test prints. Here we've got a section that's very dark and a section that's very light. All that means is that you need to increase or decrease your exposure time. It's that simple. If you make a full print and it comes out too dark, later in the game, well, that might mean that you actually need to change the aperture on your particular lens, for example, to allow more light or to decrease the light. Ultimately, brightness is due to time. If it's way too bright, then that means that's not enough time. And if it's way too dark, that means that's too much time. Very simple. Okay, so the next thing we want to look at here is actually color. Sometimes, especially when you're first starting out making prints, your first test print might be completely off when it comes to color. It might be extremely blue or extremely green or whatever, you name it. So we'll actually use this sheet again as an example. As you can see here, this is very, very blue. What does that mean? Well, that means that my color settings were too far in one direction from where it's supposed to be. How do you fix this? What I recommend for you is actually, when you're first making your test print, you should set your enlarger to somewhere right in the middle when it comes to color settings. So I would recommend 00 for cyan. For magenta, let's say 60, and then for yellow, let's say 60 also. Doing that will kind of typically put you right in the middle of many enlargers, and then from there, you can tailor whether up or down in terms of filtration. And that will potentially get you somewhere more in the middle when it comes to the color of your prints. So if your print is way too blue, that means you're way too far in the blue direction, so you got to pull it back from there. You got to add more filtration or less filtration depending on how you set up your settings. If your print is way too red, for example, then you're probably allowing way too much magenta and way too much yellow. So you probably want to dial that back as well. As always, go ahead and look at the color wheel. That's going to give you the answer. That's going to tell you what you need to do to react to the color that you're seeing on your print. The next issue you might encounter is this. And what you see here is a completely blank piece of paper. And what happens here? Well, this basically means that your developer did absolutely nothing, or maybe you even forgot to develop your sheet, and then you blitzed it, which wiped off all of the leftover emulsion that wasn't sensitized by the developer. And when you do that, that's what you get, a completely white piece of paper. So that one's easy to fix. All that means is you need to develop your sheet. Maybe your developer's exhausted, maybe you didn't develop at all. The point is you need to develop it first, and then when you blitz it, you shouldn't end up with a clean sheet of paper like this. So the next thing you might encounter is actually faint areas on your print. So what do I mean by that? That means, your print generally looks like it was developed and blitzed properly, but for whatever reason, there are some areas that are much fainter, much lighter than others. It's almost like splotches of light developing. So what does that mean? That one's actually pretty simple as well. And I think in that case, it's typically going to be because of your developer. So those are very easy things to fix. You can basically mix new developer. You can heat up your developer a little bit hotter. You can use more developer in that individual shot. Or you could just develop your prints for a little bit longer. Maybe you didn't give it enough time. The point is you should have very even developing when your developer is hot and fresh and all of the above. Next thing I want to talk about is actually one of the most annoying things. If we look at this print right here, you see that on this image there's a couple like big blue blotches. What does that mean? That means inadequate blitzing. So that could mean that my blitz is exhausted, or it's not hot enough, or I just didn't blitz for long enough. It's kind of what I just mentioned with the developer, except this time it's with the blitz. And of course, that's pretty easy to fix. All you have to do is mix some new blitz, or potentially heat it up a little bit more, or just use it for a little bit longer for that particular round of blitzing. That should get rid of those big blue blotches. And those blue blotches are actually the color of the paper. If you ever take an unexposed sheet of paper, an undeveloped one, and look at it in daylight, which instantly means it's ruined, nonetheless, you can look at it and see that it's actually blue. Some brands are blue, some brands are another color, but the particular one I use is blue. The next thing we want to look at is actually dark blotches on your prints. You see here, this particular page has these big kind of, orangey brown blotches, and sometimes it's even darker. This one's also very simple. That means that your paper actually has light leaks. So if you didn't store your paper properly, or maybe in your darkroom there's kind of some stray light coming through and it's hitting your unexposed piece of paper, when you develop it, you're going to get those big blotches. And for me, this happens sometimes because I get kind of creative with how I store my paper, especially when I'm using torn pieces of paper like this that I use for test prints. I don't take as much care with those, and therefore sometimes they get exposed to a little bit of stray light. So either way, that's easy to fix as well. Just store your paper better. The only thing to note is, if you have one sheet of paper that has some of these light leaks, the odds are that other sheets of paper in that same box might have light leaks as well. So if you find one like this, perhaps do a test print afterwards to see if other sheets of paper also have light leaks. If you see a few of them in a row that have light leaks, then that kind of layer of stack probably has light leaks. Maybe the paper under it won't have any, but ultimately it's a sign that your paper might be ruined. But either way, you can do a couple tests and check it out for yourself. The next one is really, really annoying, and it's actually very frustrating when it happens. But if we look at this print here, you see that there's some white circles, little specks in different places. That actually means that the print itself or the lens itself had some dirt. And that's annoying because it's very easy to prevent. So what I recommend to everyone is, if you see that on your paper, that means you have to be a bit more careful in between each round of printing. You want to use your air blower, or you want to use a piece of paper or something and basically fan over your unexposed sheet of paper before making your exposure. Because if you do it afterwards, it was already on the paper when you made your exposure, so it's going to be shown there. But if you do it before, you get your sheet of paper nice and clean, then make your exposure, then you shouldn't have anything to worry about. But this one's fully preventable. You just have to be a bit careful and think about it ahead of time. The next one is also fully preventable, and that has to do with fingerprints. As you can see in some prints, like this one right here, there's a little bit of a mark right there. And in a lot of my prints, you'll see a lot of my test prints, you'll see little marks. And ultimately, those little marks basically are fingerprints. And that's easy to kind of avoid, because ultimately you have to handle your paper very carefully and don't touch it, especially on the surface where the print colors are going to show. That way you don't get any fingerprints. If you have borders in your image, then you can kind of handle it. Like on this image, for example, you've got big borders. There, potentially, you can kind of handle it and touch it. But ultimately, you want to be very careful. I don't wear gloves during my print sessions just because the tactileness of bare hands is actually very useful when moving around in the dark. But if you really want to be guaranteed, you can wear some sort of gloves, whether cloth gloves or rubber gloves or whatever. Ultimately, just know that with gloves, you might still have dirt on the gloves as well, and that might get on your sheet. So you want to be careful no matter how you do it. But bare hands are okay as long as you really kind of treat the paper with finesse and grab things by the edges and by the corners, because that border area won't have any print on it and it'll be completely blitzed off, so it shouldn't be noticeable anyways. The last thing we want to talk about here is focus. So if you look at your print and you see that it's out of focus, then that's pretty clear sign that means you have to refocus your image. There's a couple of things you can do. First and foremost, as I said earlier in the previous video, when we talk about equipment, using a focus finder is the only way to get perfect results each and every single time. If you use just your eyes, you can still get really good results, but it's going to be a bit harder to guarantee. So you want to do that. Be very careful when focusing and use a focus finder if possible. The other thing you want to do is actually stop down your lens. So if your lens, for example, at most wide open is a 2.8 f-stop, maybe you should print at f8. If your lens is, less wide open than that, then you can kind of bump it up even more. But the point is, you don't ever want to print with your lens fully wide open, because just like lenses for cameras, the most wide open setting is typically the least sharp setting. And you might even get some sort of vignetting or something around the corner. So with printing, you want to stop down to f8, f10, f11, something like that. And then that'll give you the best odds of having the most sharp print possible, and also kind of just have the best amount of detail. The other thing is, if you're using a small negative such as 35 millimeter and you really try to blow it up into a big image, there things are going to appear out of focus when you look at them up close. This, for example, is a 35 millimeter negative that I printed fairly large. If you look up close, things might look soft, and that's because this is a big enlargement. So smaller negatives enlarge bigger, you will apparently lose some of the detail. But if you look at it from afar, it'll look much better. So you just have to keep that in mind. If you're using medium format negatives, it's probably less of a problem because those negatives are much bigger and therefore can handle much bigger enlargements. But with 35 millimeter, it's something you're gonna have to consider. So I hope all those points were helpful for you. I know these are things that I had to learn kind of the hard way by trial and error, and there wasn't too much good information out there to help guide me. So I hope that actually helps you. You're still gonna encounter some of these things, nothing's ever gonna go perfectly, but at least now you have a couple ideas and a couple tools to help you troubleshoot and get over those possible issues. So that's it, everyone. I hope you enjoyed these videos and I hope they were very helpful as well. Remember, this is a 4-part series, so make sure to check out all 4 so you can get the full instruction on how to make darkroom prints at home just like I do it. That's it, y'all. I'm out.